We are a philosophy organization, and this popped up on my social media, right? From Moth. Right? Philosophy sounds so exhausting. Why do you people want to think so bad? That's a really good question. Because philosophy is hard. It is abstract. It is often, if you get it wrong, something that takes you to weird places. But our proposition at Atlas Society as objectivists is that philosophy matters, that in fact it is ultimately of life and death important. So my question today is, who needs philosophy? And I want to answer that in three different ways. And I want to start at the individual level, why it matters personally to each of us as individuals. And I know some of you instantly will recognize Chuck Norris. For the younger people in the room, he might be a slightly more distant figure. But Chuck Norris came to fame through his martial arts prowess. He was the first kind of non-Japanese to win a major international martial arts tournament. And then he, of course, used that to catapult himself into a movie career. Those of us who grew up with classic martial arts films remember Bruce Lee, of course, and Chuck Norris, and those were the glory days for the first big round of martial arts. So he's a very accomplished individual in multiple fields, big screen, small screen, martial arts, and other things. I remember I was at a conference one night, flipping around the television late at night, and there was an interview with Chuck Norris, and the interviewer was asking the question that successful people get asked, well, how did you become so successful? And this basically was Chuck Norris's answer. He cited his mother. He says his mother was the most important influence on him as a child, and he said this about her. She was always up, even in the worst of times, and she passed this philosophy on to me. And being a philosophy guy, the philosophy word caught my attention. But this is exactly right, because it is a philosophy, and we ask, well, someone who is up, characteristically up, even when things go bad, you get down for a while, but even in the depths, you are looking forward. This is a solvable problem, and you remain optimistic and action-oriented toward that. So we have an ism. We say this is optimism. Right? So she's an optimist, and she imbued him with this optimistic philosophy. Now, if we ask, what are optimists optimistic about? And then it becomes more complex. We say, well, often they're optimistic about themselves. They believe they have the intelligence, they can acquire the knowledge, they can develop the skills, they can handle problems when they come along. So I've got this generalized optimism about me. About other people. Other people are smart, they're competent. Of course, there are some who are not, but by and large, right, you can work with other people, we can solve problems together. Other people are doing good work out there that's going to benefit me, so I'm generally optimistic about people. Or about the world in general, right? I can sense that the world is not hostile, that no matter what I do and how I try, the world is just going to crush me down and grind me down into non-existence. So all of these things add up to a sense that I in general, people in general, the world in general is open, and then I'm going to live my life right according to that. And then Chuck Norris's claim was that that was enormously influential and foundational for his ability to go on and set the huge goals that he did for himself and achieve them. Now, he's an optimist, but I want to contrast that with the opposite, which of course is to be a pessimist. And where the philosophy matters is that pessimism also is a kind of philosophy. Now, this is from my graduate school. When I was a first-year graduate student, I got to know some of the other graduate students, but also the undergraduates. And at Indiana University, where I went to graduate school, they had a huge journalism school, and they put out a daily newspaper. It was a very professional newspaper, put out by the students. Sorry. And as it turned out, The editor of the student magazine was a senior undergraduate philosophy major whom I knew. Very smart guy, and learning, of course, a lot of deep stuff from the very accomplished philosophy professors from whom I was also learning. And this was an editorial that this guy wrote, and I want to read it through with you because it's worth dwelling upon. So this is a guy who was then 22 years old at the beginning of his life, getting set for going forward. He's talking about the drop and add experience. Now, this is at Indiana University. The state religion in Indiana is basketball. And what they have is, of course, all of the highly professional facilities for the university as a whole team. But the university has like 35,000 students or so at that time. And there's a lot of intramural basketball. So they have huge basketball stadiums. And one of them, you have to imagine this, imagine a basketball court, the size of it, and imagine 8 of them next to each other, and then another 8 facing them. So a building that contains 16 basketball courts, and this is where intramural occurs. So what happens in the first week of the semester is students try out various courses and they decide, I don't want to take this course, I'm going to drop it, I'm going to add various other courses. You are assigned a time to go to this huge gymnasium, and every department is set up there, and you get the paperwork signed for what you're going to drop and add. No air conditioning, late August, southern Indiana weather. So it's a zoo, so to speak. But this becomes then a metaphor for life in the hands of this very intelligent, well-educated young man, editor of the student newspaper. And he wrote this: I always go to drop an ad, right? But I don't like it. No one does. But there you can see what this school is really like. People wandering about, frantic people trying to add something they need, frantic people trying to get rid of something they can't handle. Mobs of people looking lost, crowded, noisy, hysterical. You see, I go to drop an ad because I don't want to let myself forget that I am only a number. There were thousands of people at drop an ad. Everyone was alone. And none of your organizations or cliques or habits will change that. I don't care how smart or charming or successful you are. Thousands of scared, frantic people, all alone. And then we get the F word. Fuck your long-term plans, your institutions, they won't help. Sleep well tonight. Okay. All right, now that's pessimism. And what is he pessimistic about? Well, he's pessimistic about himself, but he's also pessimistic about himself in a social context, what he can expect and understand with respect to other people, and when he observes other people, what's going on with respect to them. And there's no solution to this possible. Now, this is a young man at the beginning of his life. What can we predict 10, 20 years for him if this is his operative set of beliefs? What's his career going to be like? Will he work hard at it? What will his friendships be like? How will he be as a parent if he decides to become a parent? How will he vote? And so on. Something fundamental to his orientation to himself, to other people, and the world at large. Now, but the world at large, it's not just that everybody is hostile and frantic and alone. During graduate school, I also had a summer job working in the old maps room in the library, and it was great because they had a lot of really cool old maps. This is a pre-Columbus map from Europe about the world. It's actually Scandinavia. This is Denmark and Sweden and what we now call Norway, Finland over there, and so on. But what's cool about this map is when you zoom in, because this is Europe, the Europe that we know, and then it goes out toward the edges of the map. So if you go sailing out, what do you find? This is the world. And then what you see is all around the map, things like this. Right? There's the land, ships go out, and then there are these great, huge sea monsters that attack you. Right? And there's another one, right? And they kill you. And the contrast here is, if you go out into the world, right, how are you thinking about going out into the world? And then in these late medieval maps, the idea is it's this hostile place that will, in fact, kill you, right? So what you probably should do is stay safe at home. And that's an orientation toward the world at large, which is a philosophical orientation. And while we're in the land of fiction, here's the contrast, right, to a very modern one, where of course we have human beings going out into the world, the universe at large. But the philosophy about going out into the world is completely different, and the psychology that goes along with this. So this is Star Trek, this is the Enterprise, and we're going out enterprising. And many of you, of course, will know the slogan, which is, this is what we are going to do. We are all about boldly going out into the world, having adventures, challenges, sometimes getting close to death, but we're going to solve it and come back next week and have another great adventure. And that's what life is about. But the contrast between that and this is, don't go out into the great world because monsters are going to kill you. Stay home and hope they don't capture you. Now, that's philosophy. And then here I've just got a bunch of cliche formulations that we've all heard. And I like, with my undergraduate students who are first being exposed to philosophy, typically to spend some time with formulations like this as they are trying to wrap their minds around what philosophy is. And they've all heard things like, well, it may be true for you, but it isn't true for me, right? If it feels good, do it. I couldn't help it. Nobody's perfect. It was good in theory, but it didn't work out in practice, right? God works in mysterious ways. Life's a bitch and then you die. Actually, that one's from a t-shirt, right, and so forth. But all of those are extraordinarily big claims about the nature of the world, right? About knowledge, about the relationship between theory and practice, about whether we're to think of God as understandable or ultimately unintelligible and the world unintelligible. Can we trust ourselves? Can we achieve some level of high competence or perhaps even perfection and so on? Should we have a rational plan and put it into existence, or should we just let our feelings, channel our deepest feelings and operate on the basis of those? And all of those, when you answer all of those questions for yourself and internalize them and make them part of your operating psychology, that's your philosophy of life put into practice. Now, of course, optimism, pessimism, strong forms of each at opposite ends of along various spectrums. One of the ongoing projects for each of us is to sort out where on that spectrum we think we should be, and then commit ourselves to a plan of action based on that. But that philosophy work has to be done by each and every one of us in order to put together a life plan. And these are the kinds of questions that we run into. Now, Rand argues that philosophy is important individually, that the decisions we make, the general decisions that are going to shape our thinking, our habits of reacting emotionally and intellectually and physically, what values we commit to, whether we put them together in an integrated package or a disintegrated package or not, all of those are predictive of what's going to happen in your life 5, 10, 20, 40 years down the road. We're a big-brained creature. We can and should plan for our lives for the long term. Now, she scales that up, though, and this is a transition to the next part. We also, of course, are interested in ourselves in a broader social context. Right? And we know when we start looking at different social contexts that there are very different modes of living in different social contexts. So there's all these different cultures, and in many cases they have very different philosophies, different ways of thinking about the world, different understandings about what the important values are, how things should be socially organized. In more organized social institutions, these become legal frameworks and entire political frameworks and so on. And of course, we're engaged in all of those cultural philosophical debates and all of the political philosophy debates. And as objectivists, we scale up that principle, just as your personal philosophy is predictive of your future trajectory, a nation's or a culture's philosophy is predictive of its trajectory. And then it also explains why we have the kinds of collisions of cultures, collisions of nations that we have. And the claim then is that philosophy is hugely important, perhaps of primary importance, or where it's least significantly in the mix. Now, this is Rand's, just as a man's actions are preceded and determined by some form of idea in his mind, so a society's existential conditions are preceded and determined by the ascendancy of a certain philosophy among those whose job it is to deal with ideas. And then a very interesting claim. Right? The events of any given period of history are the result of the preceding period. So you want to know what's going on big picture in any given time in a culture, look at what the intellectuals were doing a generation earlier, 20, 30 years. Of course, there's going to be some relativity of there, depending on modes of communication and various other institutions as well. So, in my short form version of this from Lord Bolingbroke, if you want to understand history, and we all want to understand history, you need to understand the philosophy, because history is just philosophy working itself out by example. And that's a very interesting claim about the importance of philosophy. So I want to investigate this a little bit. So we're now early in the 21st century, so we have some time to, and distance from the 20th century, we can step back. And from an American perspective primarily, it's kind of a war-like century, and there's obviously some huge wars, but I've got a list here of some major wars that the US was involved with. So World War I, 1914, 1918, World War II, 1939 to 45, Cold War, basically post-1945 through 1991, Korean War starting in the 50s, Vietnam War getting going in the late 50s on into the 1960s, ending in early 1970s. So those were interested in saying, why do we fight wars? And why sometimes do we fight so many wars, and other times we don't fight very many wars? Right? And there's interesting historical differences at different periods. And why are some nations chronically involved in wars and other ones not very often involved in wars? And since the stakes are so high in war, this is, of course, a fascinating question. So as we try to work on this a little bit, let's go to World War I and say, well, who was involved in World War I? And then on one side, we have the German, Austro-Hungarian Empire, Turkey. They were the Axis powers. And they were opposed by France, Britain, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. A little bit later, the USA joined the war, and then Russia. And I've got Russia in brackets. Why? Well, because Russia is always complicated. Right. The Russians really didn't want to get involved in the war in the first place. They had a kind of a religious affection for Serbia, both being Orthodox. They had a kind of defensive alliance with France, but primarily this was a Western European thing, and they didn't want to get involved, so they kind of sort of reluctantly got involved. Of course, they were terrible at it. They suffered huge losses. But also then the complication is that in 1917, Russia went through its own communist revolution, and the communists at that point said, sorry, we're not fighting this war anymore. That's just all you Western capitalists just kill each other off. We're out, and we're going to go do something different. So Russia's involved, but I'm putting it in brackets for those reasons. Mainly, those were the antagonists there. World War II. Again, right, we've got Germany. But now, Germany is allied with the Italians, and it's allied with the Japanese, or weird, way over on the other side of the world. Again, Russia, right, in the brackets, and they are up against, and interestingly, a similar list here: France, Britain, Canada, Australia, United Commonwealth nations. And again, a little bit later and reluctantly, the United States, and Russia, again, in brackets. Again, just a sidebar on Russia. Russia started the war allied with Germany. They had the pact, the Nazis and the communists. They were jointly going to invade Poland, to divide Poland amongst themselves. So for the first basically 2 years of the war, they were allies, and they did jointly invade Poland. The Russians got there a couple of weeks after the Nazis had taken over much of Poland. And then in 1941, Hitler turned on Stalin, Germany turned on Russia, and suddenly they went from being allies to being enemies, and so now the Russians are on this side of the thing. So again, Russia is complicated, but they're on the story. So Cold War, essentially Russia/Soviet Union versus United States. Korean War and Vietnam War, I'll put them together. North Korea, Russia with backing from China and Russia. Vietnam War, North Vietnam with backing from Russia and China. And then on the other side, the two South Vietnam with US support, and South Korea, again, with US support. Okay, so these are the major players. I say major players because obviously lots of other countries are involved. Okay, so is there a pattern here? This is then going to be the next question. So why are these countries going to war, right, with each other? That's our big overall question. Now, next question I want to ask is, well, what kind of societies are we talking about? And this is partly cultural politics, but then also political philosophy and then institutional philosophy. And then we start to say things like, well, in World War I, Germany, Austro-Hungary, and Turkey, they were all empires, okay, and they were all authoritarian empires, and they were all quite militaristically authoritarian empires. And that's how we would describe them in terms of their political orientations. Then if we go to the other side, their antagonists are all, broadly speaking, democratic republics politically, and they're all free market in varying degrees, friendly, some more robustly so than others. So in this case, what we have is democratic republic, capitalist nations against various forms of authoritarian nations. Okay, that's interesting. World War II. Again, we've got on the right side a number of broadly democratic, republican, free market, capitalist-oriented nations, all of which are then allied with each other. Against, in this case, Germany had adopted National Socialism. Italy was now formally a fascist nation, and Japan was an authoritarian, hierarchically based militaristic society. Cold War, again, democratic, republican, capitalist nation against a formerly communist nation. And in the Korean War, the Vietnam War, same thing. Okay. So there is a pattern there. Okay. Then this is a political difference. So where do those political differences come from? I say, well, if we think about democratic, republican, and capitalist people, who are the most famous names associated with articulating that political philosophy, that orientation of life? We should be democratic, republican, we should be capitalists, and my suggestion here would be, of course, John Locke, absolutely important. Adam Smith, 1776, The Wealth of Nations, same year as the Declaration of Independence. A little bit later, John Stuart Mill, kind of a softer version of political and cultural liberalism, extraordinarily influential. So we got those three guys. And if you look at the last few centuries of political philosophical history, you come up with these names. And what's interesting about them is that all three of them are British. And all three of them are philosophers, developing comprehensive philosophies of life. And of course, they're all geniuses, so they're developing well-articulated, well-argued philosophies that are extraordinarily influential among other very smart people in their cultures. Now let's try the other side. If we think about authoritarianism in the modern world, communism, National Socialism, where do those come from? And who are the big names that we would most likely cite? And then Hegel, probably the most influential philosopher, some other candidates that are possible, but he's going to be on everybody's top 2 or 3 list anyways, most influential philosophers of the 19th century, George Hegel. Strong anti-individualist, anti-democrat, authoritarian, militaristic communism. Well, this guy. Right? And then Friedrich Nietzsche, outspoken, explicit advocate of slavery, a kind of power politics-based aristocracy. Democracy, capitalism, republicanism are naive, silly nonsense. And what do they all have in common? Well, these three are all German. And they are all philosophers. Now, Karl Marx, of course, is mostly known for his economic theorizing and his political activism, but he had a PhD in philosophy from a German philosopher from Germany, where that means something, getting a PhD in philosophy from a German university. And everything else is an outflowing of this integrated philosophical system that he developed. Nietzsche's PhD was actually in classical philology, but his work is integrating the language with the culture, with the philosophies, and his work is primarily of a philosophical nature. So these three most influential big names in the history of philosophy coming out of the 19th century, all German, all philosophical. Hegel, early part of the 1800s, Marx, middle part of the 1800s, Nietzsche, end of the 1800s. So what we have then is, on this analysis, the big names in British philosophy lined up against the big names in German philosophy. They're influential. They succeed in influencing whole cultures to become, on the one hand, more democratic, capitalist, Republican, and the others more militaristic, adversarial, authoritarian, collectivist. So a reading then is to say why we had the wars that we had in the 20th century and why the nations that were lined up against each other that they were pointing their weapons at each other is because those nations were instantiations of political philosophies and political cultures that were developed by the previous generations of geniuses in philosophy. And that's an interesting hypothesis. Philosophy then explains why the millions of people died in the wars over the course of the 20th century. It's literally life and death. Now, that's to focus on the individuals. Chuck Norris, the pessimistic student editor, scaling up to nations in the 20th century. I'm going to go even further. There's a staple when you take courses in, say, Western civilization, to say that one thing that's very interesting about Western civilization is that it's not a mono-civilization like so many others. That is to say, most other civilizations historically have been, everybody is by and large on the same page religiously, morally, culturally, about what the important values in life are, what boys and girls should learn to do. Well, that's not true in Western civilization. The Western civilization standard story is to say that it is, in the early modern world, a kind of hybrid, that it draws on important earlier civilizations and tries to integrate them or put them together, and that a lot of what explains why we have the persistent arguments that we do, often at a very high philosophical level and all the way down on political issues, is because what we're trying to do is draw on very different civilizational traditions that may or may not fit very well together. So, I'll give a little taste of this one here. I'm going to start with, I'm going to point this at Lawrence over there. This issue of moral principles. Suppose we say we want our society to be moral, and so we're going to organize ourselves socially according to what we think is right, what we think is just, and we'll allocate power and make legal decisions and so forth based on what we think a good society will achieve. That then is to say that we're going to take our political direction from ethics or from morality. And the United States, we know, is one, and perhaps one of the very few examples of a new nation coming into existence explicitly based on articulating a set of moral principles. That these are the moral principles that are so important that we're going to kind of enshrine them at the beginning of our country and base everything that we do based on these principles. And that's what is announced in the Declaration of Independence, primary author, Thomas Jefferson. So if you talk to most Americans and admirers of America around the world, you say, do you think the Declaration of Independence is a good document? That it's an idealistic document? Right? Most of the people will say yes. Okay? And so what are the moral principles that are built into the Declaration of Independence? So we're going to become independent, and we're going to say these are foundational for us and build everything on the basis of that. Well, first one is the idea of the right to life. Every individual has his or her own life, and they have it by right. That's right for them to have their own life. They're not owned by the king. They're not owned by or subordinate to an aristocratic class and so forth. Right to life as an absolute or inalienable moral principle. The right to liberty. Every individual has the right to choose for himself or herself all sorts of things. You're not again, given a list of rules and you're just following someone else's agenda for your life. And pursuit of happiness. You should strive to be happy. This matters. Right? Of course, it's your life, and that means it's your responsibility, and you are free to try lots of different things and cultivate your own package of principles and values to put together the most happily realized life that you possibly can. And this is so important that we need to break away from the mother country and fight if necessary, and it turned out to be necessary, and we're going to take these principles and then detail them in various ways in our other founding documents, constitutions, and all of the laws and decisions will be made by reference to these principles. This is a big deal. Now, I want to contrast that, though, with another set of moral ideals about how one should organize oneself socially, what it is to be a good person. And I've got here another hugely influential part of Western civilization, which is its religious history. And when one joins a religious order for predominant amount of Western religious history, right, one takes certain vows. And this is taken seriously. You are joining this community, and here are our foundational vows. These are the things that are so important. You want to be a good person. You want to dedicate your life to the highest ideals and join a like-minded community of other individuals devoting themselves to the highest ideals, and we're going to make our society based on this. What are those vows? First vow, the vow of poverty. A good person will be a poor person, will not be interested in materialistic wealth, profit, money seeking. You will abjure all of your material possessions and have the minimum amount necessary to keep body and soul together. That's what it is to be a good person. You will be obedient. You will not have your own will. You will obey higher authority, the direct authority of God or the institutional authority based on the authority of God. To the extent that you have your own will and you are disobedient, you are a bad person. Obedience is fundamental and universal. And then celibacy. So poverty, chastity, and obedience, or poverty, obedience, and celibacy. To be a good person, you will abjure all sexual, erotic, romantic interest in your life. Of course, this is a huge sacrifice for you, but you will do it. You will keep yourself pure. Right? And then, of course, all of that energy that you otherwise would waste in that area can be devoted toward being a better, obedient servant of the rest of your community. Now, I put this up to make a point. Right? When we are asking, for example, the founding fathers who were crafting the Declaration of Independence and ratifying it, where did they get that from? And then we start doing a little more intellectual history. And of course, they're getting it from Locke and Montesquieu and Algernon Sidney and various others, Hugo Grotius. And then we say, well, where did those guys get their ideas from? And you find out that almost always they are hearkening back to Greek and Roman authors. They're great admirers of Aristotle, Plato to some extent, the Stoics, Cicero, right, and others. And so what we have then is the idea in the early modern world, as the declarations that are of independence are saying, what we need to do is take the Greco-Roman philosophical and political model. And of course, the Greeks were the first systematically to experiment with democracy. The Romans the first to do republicanism. You find the seeds of market capitalists. The Athenians were really an amazingly free market culture, an oasis in a much controlled economies around the Mediterranean basis. So what we need to do is to take all of those ideas, update them, repackage them for the modern world, and try again. So we're taking essentially Greco-Roman philosophy and integrating it into the modern world. And of course, it's obvious, Greco-Romans have a lot to do with who we are politically. Basically, in the United States, you go to any small town that's the county seat, and right in the middle of the square, you find a building that's usually the courthouse, and it's almost always Greco-Roman architecture. And that's making a political statement. We are going to do our politics the Greek and Roman way as expressed in this architecture. And then the national capital, it's the same thing. But it's also equally the case that the Judeo-Christian tradition is hugely important to many, many people in Western civilization, forms part of their identity. Equally important. And of course, we find politicians and non-politicians, right, who will hearken back explicitly to Judeo-Christian, right, moral values. Now, this way, though, of stripping them down to what they mean essentially, and to try to say, what are the three most important things that the Greco-Roman tradition boils down to, according to its most articulate activist representatives in the modern world, it's those three moral values. What does the Judeo-Christian tradition boil down to in its essentials by its most articulate and committed members? And both of them are saying that we are moral idealists. We want to build our society on the basis of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and we are to thrill to that. And the other says that we are going to build our monastic community based on, or try to bring the city of God to earth as much as possible, based on these essential principles that our most committed and intelligent and articulate advocates are going to advocate, and that is poverty, chastity, and obedience. And that's a collision, right? The right to life versus poverty, right? What does life mean? You should be a free agent and jealously guard your liberty versus you should be obedient. Right? You should pursue happiness. You want it all. You should be celibate. Now, you push that, that's an either or. And nonetheless, it is part of our cultural inheritance that both of these traditions are important to us, still operative, and that means that we are engaged in an ongoing philosophical enterprise of taking these two ancient sets of philosophical principles, trying to integrate them into our personal lives and into our political lives. And how that is going to go, of course, depends on what decisions each of us makes and then what we make collectively over the course of the next generation. So this is not necessarily a new point. This is a Tertullian, church father, writing around late 100s, early 200s AD. And he's one of the first to start doing Christian theology more systematically. But of course, he's in the context of the Roman Empire, and the Roman Empire had inherited many of the Greek schools of philosophy, and there are lots of them kicking around, and Christianity is trying to make a foothold, and it's trying to engage in the debates with all of the pagan philosophers. And Tertullian is very perceptive in arguing. If we look at Athens, here Athens as the representative of what Greek philosophy ultimately boils down to. It's Greece's culture, Greek philosophy's highest achievement. And we contrast that with Jerusalem, Jerusalem being the center of all three of the world's, or the Western world's religions, and what it boils down to. And then from his philosophical perspective, and he's asking this as a rhetorical question. You have to add a little dash of sarcasm. Right? What has Athens to do with Jerusalem? Right? And the answer is nothing. What concord is there between the academy, that's of course Plato's academy, the most famous educational university institution, and the church being the institution and doctrine former of religion. And again, sarcastically. And the idea here then is Greek philosophy and Judeo-Christian philosophy are opposite and opposed to each other. It's an either-or. But then, of course, in the modern world, we have many people who want to say, maybe it can be a both-and. And that's our central philosophical project of our time. Now here's another from Rand, from a different piece. If you understand the dominant philosophy of a society, you can predict its course. Right? And that's where we want to be, because we are living our lives now, right? Especially you young people. Where is it going to be 10, 20, 30, 40 years? I'm going to live the rest of my life in this society. I need to understand it so I can form my plan of action for my life. And of course, for all the people that I care about, I want them to be able to form their plans of actions for their lives to have it go well. To be able to do that, you have to understand your own society, and that means you have to understand its philosophy, and that's what we are here for. What's our philosophy all about? So, let me turn to questions.
Oh my, well, I hope you're all awake now. Okay. Well, we'll turn to questions, so please line up as we did last time behind Clara and myself if you're on this side of the room, and we'll start taking some questions. Knock on wood, it appears the jackhammer has stopped for now, so that is something to celebrate. So, all right, first question over there by Clara.
Hello. Very insightful talk, very enlightening. So I have a question. You draw a contrast between this sort of asceticism of religious figures and the Enlightenment liberalism espousing the Declaration of Independence. Are these two things necessarily in conflict? Can they not exist in harmony? Because I see the sort of Enlightenment liberalism as the rules-based moral order by which people generally live their lives, and the asceticism as like a personal code of conduct that uses those rule-based moral order to actually exist. You can't really deny yourself without actually having liberty. So what's the disharmony between the two in your opinion?
Well, that's the right question to ask. Right? Is there a harmony? Is there a level of analysis mismatch that's going on, that these are directed at different domains? When we understand each of these as a principle, irrespective of levels of abstraction and domains that we apply, is there a clear-cut conceptual opposition or not? And then one of the answers to try to harmonize, I don't want to go too far down this road, but I can see there are a lot of people who do try to go down this road, is to say, along the lines that we were saying. One is meant to be applied to society more broadly. The other is merely a personal code of life. So it's a domain mismatch, and you can't kind of transpose one from the other. Now, of course, that turns on a certain conception of what religion is, and that's one that's more common in Protestant circles, where they tend to atomize people and say it's you as an individual responsible for your soul, independent of all of the other institutions that are out there. So when we are valorizing poverty and obedience and chastity, that's a personal decision you are making in terms of your relationship to God. It has nothing to do with what the broader society is going to be. And that's an argument that can be made, but noticing that it is taking religion in a particular direction. It's also taking that religion in a particular direction only in the last 500 years, which is to say that's kind of a non-standard interpretation from 2,000 years of religious history question. And then the other approach, and usually the response, this is even from inside the religion perspective, is to say that no, you can't parcel out yourself from the rest of society, from the rest of the universe. We are all one in the body of Christ, and the church or some sort of social institution is a unified institution. And when we're trying to bring the city of God down to the city of earth, it's not just a personal project. Instead, we want to institutionalize it, that society's laws should be based on God's laws, so there's a universalism that is built into that. And the idea then is that in the case where we're forming a religious institution, like a convent or a monastery, we understand, of course, that there's lots of other things going on outside of society, but the attitude then is that those are just less perfectly realized versions, or those are corrupted versions of what human beings should aspire to. And what we are trying to do in building our community is model the highest possible aspiration for human beings, and then hopefully, when we have modeled it successfully, it can be applied increasingly to the rest of society. But it does then, and I'm not going to pre-close this debate, mean that we have to go down into the particular religions. And as we know, they branch off and make different demarcations at different points. So some of them will try to be more compatibilist, right? So we'll take the vow of poverty and soften it in various ways. Or in the modern world, we'll take the vow of celibacy and just get rid of that one and say, well, no, our highest exponents, they don't have to be celibate anymore. They can be married. Is that a compromise of the religion? Or is that's a detail that was overinterpreted earlier on? That's going to be an internal to religion debate. But I do think, at least at a philosophical level, if you go to the highest level of abstraction, you are running into necessarily a philosophical tension at a minimum, right? And partly that's driven by the metaphysics. Is life primarily about we're in the natural world? And human beings need to live in the natural world, and we are free agents, so that needs to be respected. And living well and flourishing and becoming happy, those are the right values, versus just on this metaphysical issue saying, no, all of that is secondary or irrelevant to one's true calling. Really, there is a realm beyond nature, and that's where we need to take all of our values from and recognize that this life is temporary and unimportant. And so, you can't take it with you, so poverty is the right way to think about your material goods. And then if you are then supernaturalistic in that sense, you're starting from a very different metaphysical value orientation.
Thank you for your interesting lecture. My question is that after the events you mentioned on your slide, like the deadliest wars, the deadliest thing in the recent history was Islamic terrorism. And do you also see, other than religion, any influence coming from Western philosophies, German, French, and Hegelian philosophies? Because before that, we had some kind of golden era of Islam where there was not such problems as we saw recently.
Yes, so if we were to carry on the analysis, I only did 20th century war, so if we say 2001, symbolically the beginning of the 21st century, the World Trade Towers, then we have a resurgent Islam or Islamism, and that's another Western religion, right, that has gotten its act together up to a certain level, and it's politicizing itself, and it's trying to make its mark on the world. So how would the analysis follow if we try to extend that war analysis into the 20th century? Does it explain things like the war on terror or not? And that's a perfectly good question to ask. And then you back into earlier eras in Islamism, where it was not so unpleasantly imperialistic, in cases where it was relatively peaceful, and within its domains, minority Christians and Jews could live and do their business. And then even to elevate, there are times in Islamic, I'm going to put that in quotation marks right now, Islamic history where there were golden ages. So if you were in Baghdad in 800s, for example, it's amazing stuff that's going on. It's it's like, Athens in London in the 1700s, just dynamic and all these great things that are going on. So then we would be asking about Islam and what the true definition of Islam is, and can it be softened or hardened, so that we can account for the rise and fall of Islamism as a culture. So that's just a framing of the question response, and I think to answer it more fully, though, we need to go in and do a lot of particular history. I will just say just one thing is this is a very potted piece of history here, but it's fascinating if you look at say Russia and then the Arab and Persian world. I'll just put those together. And then the Western world, which was predominantly Christian, minority Jewish. So you have three different cultures / civilizations. And what's interesting about all of them is that at some point in their history, they had a major engagement with Greek philosophy. So Greek philosophy went east, and Arab and Persian scholars were aware of it and engaged with it. It went to the north, and Russian thinkers engaged with it and thought deeply about it. And then it came to the west, and then Western thinkers and scholars engaged with it. And it's fascinating that all three of them made different decisions. When it went to Russia, and Russia was deeply orthodox at this point, the engagement was short, it was hostile, and basically the Russians said, "No way, go away, we are shutting you down," and Greek philosophy was banned and isolated. And then Russia goes on its history, 1300s, 1400s, 1500s, deeply autocratic and so forth. Islam, the one that you are raising here, is fascinating because it engages with Greek philosophy and it is torn. And they go back and forth for several centuries between saying, this is great, and we should do some of this and improve upon that. And those, I think, are going to be the eras where the Arab, Persian, and broadly Islamic world become more powerful, more intellectually active. Those are the various golden ages. But it's going back and forth across the centuries until it makes its final decision and says to Greek philosophy, no, we're going to go strictly Islamic. And then I think that's when you would mark the decline. And then the answer in Western civilization is similar. The Greek philosophy comes, serious, engage with it, back and forth for a couple of centuries, and then the Western world by and large says yes to Greek philosophy. It tames its religious fanatics, institutionally separates them, and then the West takes off. So initial immediate rejection, vacillation back and forth, but we're going to go back to old-time religion versus vacillation back and forth, and we're going to go with the Greek and Roman model. Now that's very potted, but there is something to that hypothesis.
Hey, good morning. So, you discussed how the more stronger followers and examples of religions, kind of like priests, how they have these roles, and how they're somewhat opposed to the Declaration of Independence, of that life, liberty, in your pursuit of happiness, your own personal pursuit. So I was curious what your thoughts are on more widespread, for example, Christianity within our nation and the Constitution. John Adams famously said that our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate for the government of any other. And if you look at more of, not the more, again, pastors in Christianity, they don't really follow those very strict rules, except for chastity. Obviously, that's more widespread. But 1 Timothy 5:8 said, if someone doesn't provide for their own family, and especially for a member of their household, they have denied the faith, and they are worse than those who have no faith. So I'm curious what you think of the connection between Christianity and this nation, that's its founding principles, and how they align or don't.
Yeah. No, that's a great question, and I think part of our nation is this ongoing debate and discussion in every generation about exactly that question, and we find the full range of opinion that is being articulated. But I think the strength, though, is that and why we have been able to have this discussion now for 300 years in the Western nations is that by and large, the Greco-Roman Enlightenment model won and established the institutional framework within which we can have this ongoing philosophical debate. And then what we find is always in every generation the full range of opinion. People want to say, it's the Judeo-Christian tradition is a plague on society. We need to be secular, naturalistic in order to have a politically liberal society. Those who want to say, as John Adams does, and that's an important quote, the founding fathers themselves were divided on this issue. You have to have some measure of religion, broadly speaking, in the culture to support the moral commitments upon which this kind of a political society can flourish. Otherwise, it's going to turn to the dogs. He was more pessimistic about human nature than many of the other founders, so that might be a big part of the explanation there. And then those who want to just compromise and say, well, we need to kind of mix and match. We don't need to be purist. Instead, we'll just go somewhere down the middle, have a little bit of Christianity, a little bit of Greek and Roman philosophy, and so on. So the debate goes on.
All right, we'll take one more question over here, and then we're going to have to go to break.
I'm paraphrasing Ayn Rand. Like I think she described that Western philosophy has always been like the eternal duel between Aristotle and Aristotle and his mentor Plato. Yeah. And Aristotle, of course, is credited for this individualism. But Plato, according to some scholars like Karl Popper, will identify them as like authoritarians who open society and its enemies. I just want to hear your comments about even within Western Greek philosophy, this duel between Plato and Aristotle. Like, how did it shift? Like, why did Aristotle win out and went the other way, and Plato's side, the authoritarian, did?
Yeah. I think the claim that Western philosophy is a duel between Plato and Aristotle is a simplification. I think the best simplification you can do is to say it's not a two-way battle, but rather a three-way battle. And that what this leaves out, the Plato versus Aristotle duality, is the sophists. So if you take metaphysics, and again, this will be potted Plato, you say, what's the nature of reality? And the Platonists say, well, there's this higher non-physical reality that's perfect and pure, and this world is corrupt and lower and physical and so on. And then the potted version of Aristotle is to say, no, it's the natural world that's causal and it's amenable to empirical investigation and science, and so you have that duality, and that's one that I was stressing here. But a third historically significant set of answers is the skeptical answers, to say that, well, we don't know, right, what the nature of higher reality is, or if there is such a thing. We don't even know the nature of this reality. Everything is just ultimately unintelligible. So you can be a supernaturalist or a naturalist, or you can be what we now call anti-realist and just say those are just not questions that we can intelligibly think about. It's one thing to say that we, to carry on this duality, how do we acquire knowledge? Well, we use our senses and we conceptualize and we do logic and mathematics and sophisticated scientific method. And that's what we need to do in order to have knowledge, be creatures of reason consistently. And then the more Platonic answer is to say, well, reason has its limitations. If you want to get to higher truths, you ultimately need some sort of mystical insights or some sort of revelation from the higher authority that's not going to be understandable by reason and rationality, and it can't be put into a test tube and tested empirically and so on. So we have the reason versus faith, mysticism, and so forth duality. But the third major answer has been to say, well, actually, we don't know anything. There's just faith is out, mysticism is out, the senses are illusory, logic is just made up symbol manipulation, and nobody really knows anything. It's just subjective, right, whatever. So on all of the major philosophical issues, I think that might be an overstatement. There's always a trichotomy rather than a duality. And I think particularly if we're interested in our generation, the most vigorous movement right now in academic culture, philosophically, and in broader culture, it's not a principled religion, it's not a principled enlightenment, but it is that postmodern skepticism, which is ultimately a nihilism. And so I don't believe in a cyclical version of history, but all three of those are operative at any given era, or in any given era, and which one is in the ascendancy is then the most important explanation for why that culture is doing whatever it is doing. Now then the second question, do I have time for that second question about Plato in particular and the more authoritarian interpretations? Yeah, I think Karl Popper is one of many, but you know, with some quibbles here and there, he's essentially right. You know, Plato is a proto-authoritarian and a proto-small c communist, pretty much all up and down the road. And I think that's the best reading of Plato. Now it's true that Plato has his early, middle, and late phases, and he has always puts his theories in the mouths of various characters, some of whom are more or less fictional. So there's a lot of very difficult textual interpretation to say, well, what does Plato himself actually think? But I think when you do that work, Plato comes out from our perspective as 80% a bad guy. Yeah.
All right, everyone, let's give a really big round of applause to Stephen Hicks.
Thank you.